December 16th, 1944. Early morning. Monschau, Germany. The frozen earth trembled as another salvo of American artillery screamed overhead. But something was different this morning. Terrifyingly, incomprehensibly different. The shells weren't striking the ground or the trees. They were detonating in mid-air, precisely above the advancing German positions, creating a lethal rain of steel fragments that no foxhole could protect against. Among the 326th Volksgrenadier Division attacking the 38th Cavalry Squadron's positions, soldiers who had survived years on the Eastern Front encountered something that defied their understanding of warfare. These weren't the artillery patterns they knew, the predictable impacts, the safe zones, the protective value of entrenchments. This was death delivered from above with mathematical precision. At that moment, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group had just made one of the most consequential unauthorized decisions of the Battle of the Bulge. Against standing orders, without permission from higher command, he had ordered his gunners to load shells equipped with the most closely guarded secret in the Allied arsenal, proximity fuses. These devices, containing miniature radar systems that could detect their distance from targets and detonate at the optimal height, would multiply artillery lethality by a factor of 50. The mathematics of death were about to be rewritten in the frozen forests of the Ardennes. What the German soldiers couldn't know was that they had just encountered a weapon so revolutionary that it would transform not just this battle, but the very nature of warfare itself. The storm unleashed. Operation Watch am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, had begun with tremendous promise for the Wehrmacht. Hitler's last gamble involved 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, all massed in secret through the fog-shrouded Ardennes. The Führer had assured his generals that this offensive would split the Allied armies and recapture Antwerp, turning the tide of a war that was slipping inexorably toward defeat. The initial bombardment at 0530 hours on December 16th had achieved complete tactical surprise. German artillery fired at a rate of 1,600 rounds per minute along the 85-mile front. American intelligence had failed catastrophically. They hadn't detected the massive build-up, and many frontline units were either green replacements or exhausted veterans sent to this quiet sector for rest. But at Monschau, Colonel Axelson faced an impossible tactical situation. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance unit, was being overwhelmed by superior German forces. Conventional artillery couldn't stop the assault. In desperation, Axelson made his historic decision: deploy the secret proximity-fused shells without authorization. He would later face potential court-martial for this choice, but in that moment, he recognized that following orders meant certain defeat. The effect was immediate and devastating. German soldiers advancing in traditional assault formations suddenly found themselves under a type of fire they had never experienced. The shells exploded 30 to 50 feet above them, each detonation creating a cone of fragments that covered vastly more area than conventional ground-burst shells. Veterans who knew how to take cover from normal artillery were cut down in their foxholes, behind trees, in ditches, anywhere they sought shelter. The secret science of death. The proximity fuse represented the convergence of American scientific innovation and industrial capacity at their absolute peak. Unlike conventional shells that required direct impact or time fuses that often detonated at wrong heights, the proximity fuse contained a self-contained radar system no larger than a coffee can. Inside each fuse, American engineers had packed 130 electronic components, including 4 or 5 miniature vacuum tubes, depending on the model, that could withstand the incredible 20,000 times gravity force of being fired from an artillery piece. The physics involved were staggering. At the moment of firing, the acceleration would crush a glass ampule containing electrolyte, creating a battery that powered the tiny radar for the shell's flight duration. Dr. Merle Tuve at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory had driven this development with Manhattan Project-level intensity. The laboratory, disguised as an abandoned used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed 3% of all American physicists at peak production. Security matched that of the atomic bomb program. Workers couldn't discuss their work even with families, and each fuse carried a unique serial number for tracking. The technical challenge had seemed insurmountable. Vacuum tubes designed for living room radios had to be completely redesigned to survive being fired from cannons. They had to function while spinning at extreme rotational speeds, work in all weather conditions, and be sensitive enough to detect targets without premature detonation. The breakthrough came through miniaturization techniques that would later revolutionize the electronics industry. Dr. James Van Allen's tubes were no larger than pencil erasers, yet contained all the elements of conventional radio tubes. By December 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses daily. Over 100 companies contributed to the effort, from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and Crossley Corporation. The program's cost reached $1 billion in 1940s dollars, second only to the Manhattan Project in wartime spending. Authorization crisis and expansion. Axelson's unauthorized use on December 16th created an immediate command crisis. He had violated direct orders restricting proximity fuses to anti-aircraft use, fearing that captured examples might be reverse-engineered by the Germans. But the devastating effectiveness at Monschau was undeniable. The German attack had been stopped cold with casualties that shocked both sides. Word of the weapon's impact reached Supreme Headquarters rapidly. General Eisenhower, recognizing the desperate situation developing across the Ardennes, formally requested authorization on December 19th. By December 21st, all restrictions were lifted, and proximity fuses were released for general ground combat use across the entire Bulge battlefield. The rapid distribution that followed demonstrated American logistical superiority. Within days, proximity-fused shells were being delivered to artillery units throughout the Ardennes. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at Bastogne received their allocation just as the German ring closed around the town. The 420th Armoured Field Artillery Battalion, with their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began using them to defend the northwest approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, employed them with devastating effect southwest of Bastogne. Each unit discovered the same truth. Proximity fuses transformed artillery from a support weapon into a decisive battlefield tool. Forward observers no longer needed to carefully adjust fire. The fuses would find their own optimal detonation point. Accuracy requirements decreased while lethality increased exponentially. Bastogne. Surrounded but superior. The siege of Bastogne provided the perfect demonstration of proximity fuses in defensive warfare. The 101st Airborne Division, completely surrounded and outnumbered, held the vital crossroads against repeated German assaults. Their artillery support included the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 75mm pack howitzers capable of firing proximity-fused shells. Between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd fired exactly 7,676 rounds, according to official unit records. While not all were proximity-fused due to limited supply, those that were had devastating psychological and physical effects. German assault formations simply melted away under the airburst barrages, with entire platoons eliminated in seconds. The December 22nd attack following General McAuliffe's famous "nuts" reply to the German surrender demand showcased the weapon's effectiveness. German infantry advancing across snow-covered fields in traditional formations were caught in the open. The proximity-fused shells detonated overhead with precise timing, creating overlapping patterns of destruction that left no safe zones. The all-African-American 969th Artillery Battalion played an equally crucial role. Their 155mm howitzers created a ring of death around Bastogne's perimeter that German forces found impenetrable. The larger shells, detonating at 50 feet, covered even greater areas with lethal fragments. German prisoners later reported that attacking units often lost cohesion before even reaching American lines, with soldiers fleeing the incomprehensible